Welcome to the ZeroGravity podcast. I have my good friend Titus from Civic. He is the VP of go-to-market. Now, for people that are completely unfamiliar with Civic, give us a brief understanding of what you guys are hoping to accomplish.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jakes, for having me. We're on a journey to enable authentication and authorization, not just for humans, but also for the agentic AI wave that is arguably already here in many industries, so that we're able to essentially onboard users, onboard AI agents, enable them to function both in Web 2 and Web 3 contexts. Because I think in Web 2 is pretty easy, like you spin up an app, we all know that, but like with Web 3, it's still not as easy to spin up a wallet and give it an identity, give it like all it needs to be able to function and transact and work with virtual money.
Yeah, let's talk about Auth, because I feel like that is the crux of the company. And many people from a Web 2 context, obviously we have a large contingent of Web 3 followers, but they think like, I don't know, Auth is kind of a solved problem, right? Just log in with Google, just log in with Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Talk to us a little bit about like some of the issues that exist in Auth and why you guys wanted to kind of attack this particular vector.
So for anyone building a new app, I dare them to try to implement OAuth on their own. I think it's one of those things that seems like it's an easy thing to do, but then you're hit with like a plethora of vendors, a plethora of methods, and then each has its own idiosyncrasies, and then batteries may not be included. And then if you like try to roll your own, then you end up with a 3, 4, 5, 10-week project that you weren't expecting, and that delays launches. So for us, it was like, well, it's pretty obvious that people shouldn't have to learn how to manage authentication tokens, which is what happens when you essentially establish a session. And then also people should be able to onboard new users like within 5 minutes of thinking like, hey, I want an app. I spin up a Next.js app, for example, and I can vibe code that right now in Cursor if I want to with the free plan. And then it'll drop in my customer ID from the Civic dashboard from auth.civic.com. And then presto, you have a user management system already set up, and you can focus on the actual mechanics of your app. That isn't the case with the majority of solutions in the space, and definitely isn't the case with Web 3 solutions, for sure.
Yeah, let's even just keep it into a Web 2 context, and then we'll get into the idiosyncrasies of why Web 3 adds some additional complexity. So yeah, let's talk about like, let's say, I'm vibe coding, I'm in Cursor, I'm like, oh, I need people to be able to sign into this app. Talk to me a little bit about like how I would use your guys' platform to easily be able to drop that in. And then also, because most people probably have never rolled their own like OAuth or done anything like that, talk to us a little bit about user management as well, like why these things are important.
For sure. So let's start with the latter, because I feel that that's more important than the actual like how Civic works, and they'll drive nicely. So you want to be able to gate certain parts of your app and know who's accessing them, especially if you're planning to charge for certain services. That's critical. So when I first started developing kind of a few years ago, when I started my own company, that was like before GPT, 4 or 5, or wherever we are now at 4.5, I think is the latest. We were like at GPT 2, and then 3 popped up, and 3 was like really good at coding at that point. From my perspective, like looking back, it's pretty bad. But I mean, we needed to get a user management system up and running. We used Firebase for that, because that was like the thing that my senior dev knew how to work with. But ultimately, it took us a while to get everything set up, and you have to configure stuff in multiple places. It's not immediately obvious. You have to kind of dive into the myriad of pages of documentation to actually set it up right, and then make sure it works. But ultimately, what people need to remember is when you're setting up an auth system and a user management system, you're essentially wrapping your entire application, or the portion of your application that you want to be restricted, into some sort of context where you can get the user ID and make sure that user is signed in or not, and then based on that make decisions and like throw that person out of that space if they're not supposed to be there, essentially. Because you can add roles, you can add other properties to your user as you're enriching that particular account. Now, what Civic does at this point is just like completely takes the complexity out of that and then enables people to wrap their application. Like, for example, setting up a Next.js application is pretty standard. And then wrapping that initial component into the app context and saying like, hey, if this person's not logged in, present them with this iframe that offers some authentication methods. With, by the way, in Sandbox, we provide the secrets for those, so you don't even have to go and configure them yourself. And then when you're ready to move to production, you can obviously like add your own credentials, create those like Google accounts and GitHub and whatnot, and bring in those secrets so that you can reliably launch to production. But I mean, with like the general credentials, you can get up and running in less than 5 minutes, and I think that's a huge thing if you're like in a hackathon or if you're like under a deadline, which usually builders are. That's something we really wanted to make sure that it is in place. And it all works through a simple SDK. You go to documentation, you get the exact framework you want to use. We are now on like 8, I think, or 9 different frameworks. Anything for like Next Node. We have Python. We have, for example, like we have React Native. We have React Classic. Like you name it, we have it. And if we don't have it, then we have an OIDC OAuth 2.0 compatible API. So like I just talked to somebody a few weeks ago that implemented their own Go app. We don't support Go natively, but it works because it's OIDC compliant. So you just connect it to the Auth API and you exchange the tokens that way.
Very, very good. And funny enough, I used to be one of like 2 core contributors at the Firebase's JavaScript SDK. I was one of the people working on that at Google. So
very cool.
I was never the best on that one. So very cool platform you guys are building. So talk to us a little bit as we move into this like, you know, AI economy. And you talked a little bit about like, hey, we need Auth for Web3. We need it for agentic economy. Talk to us a little bit about like where you see these things going and why we need a different Auth solution for it. So we talked about kind of the Web 2 context, and let's talk about the like AI and Web 3 context.
Yeah. So when I think we were building like a few years ago when I started my company before rejoining Civic, we were building data pipelines that looked like agentic AI before agentic AI was a thing. We called it back then, even before RAG was a thing, retrieval augmented generation. We were processing essentially unstructured data with language model in the middle, and then outputting structured data through function calling. Function calling had just been released by OpenAI, which wasn't as popular as MCP, because what function calling does is it enables a question response type of relationship to with the language model, whereas MCP creates a recursive relationship with the model. And that, I think, is where an OAuth system and an authentication system, authorization system becomes critical. Because if you're doing a one-off, like you can just do an API call. That's pretty straightforward. Like it's secure. We know how to do it. We've been doing it for like 20 years. It's fine. But when you have a, recursive connection where the LLM can continue to make calls, well, you want to make sure you ring fence that in a way that not only enables you to stay away from errors, but also like protects from data leakage, creates like personalized profiles. It steers the LLM into respecting a certain budget that you want it to stay within and not kind of burn through $2,000 of tokens. So things like that, I think, are more critical to this stage of deployment, because we have now, 100,000 MCP servers out there, maybe more. I don't even know. Not all of them have Auth built in. A lot of them have something very basic built in, if any. So if you're deploying that in production, think of it as like you have 10,000 users. They're using the same MCP server. And if you commingle that context, then you end up in a potential Asana situation where company A asks for company A's data and gets company B's data instead. And that becomes the problem. So what you need to do is you need to create corridors where like user 1 has corridor 1, user 2 has corridor 2, and they never intermingle. Now, I would say even a step further than that would be for user 1, they have a personal use case, a business use case, or they're doing consulting for multiple clients. You want to make sure that they are able to do corridor 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so on, so that that data stays within its own lane and it doesn't commingle with somebody else's data. Because like, okay, sure, beyond the legal repercussions of that, it's also, it creates confusion for the LLM itself if the context gets somehow mixed together, because you're dumping everything in a kind of bulk authenticated way. Let's call it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit because I know you're head of or your VP of go to market. Talk to us a little bit about like what it takes to bring one of these products to market. Because like if I'm thinking about like OAuth, one, you have like obviously the Firebases of the world, you have the ZeroAuths of the world, and you're like, hey, we now need a new paradigm because we're in the AI paradigm, we're in the Web3 paradigm. Talk to us a little bit about like how you go about like getting market adoption.
Yeah, we're right now in a very collaborative stage where we're talking to early stage builders. I think that's Auth is one of those things that you learn about early on in your career if you're building apps, and then you kind of stick with what you know. So if you learn Firebase, you'll stick to Firebase. If you learn Auth0, you'll stick to Auth0, and so on and so forth, right? And you like a certain class of Auth providers, and there's no point for you to learn new ones unless the other ones are broken. And they're not fundamentally broken in any way. We're not claiming that at all. It's more around like, are there new functionalities that you could add on or explore that are not currently covered by, or they're currently covered by the existing provider, but in an expensive way. So for us, it's more like critical to talk to people starting off their career or developing new apps or part of hackathons and build-a-thons and all that stage and get feedback from them and make sure we're enabling people who don't have a ton of context to be able to deploy that application initially in under 5 minutes so they can focus on the core functionality. And that's, I think, the promise that we've refined and where we're seeing more adoption.
Yeah, funny enough, I'm trying to remember if I was at Google at the time when they bought Firebase, but I later switched to that team. And my understanding of why they did that acquisition is Firebase was very, very good for entry level developers, and their hope was people would graduate from Firebase into GCP, Google Cloud. Is your guys like kind of market segmentation very similar? Like, hey, go for the beginner type of market, and as they expand, people don't usually rip out auth providers, and to kind of just continuously, increase the service scope provided.
Yeah, I mean, ripping out an auth provider, anyone who's tried to do it knows it's a nightmare. Like doing even federated identities is a nightmare. Correlating identities is a nightmare. Like once you have your backend set up and it works, you don't want to break that. That's the last thing you want to do. So I empathize with anyone who's like tried to do that. It's not an easy task. I think it's like Firebase's strategy was spot on. It's like that's what led at least my company to use GCP back then, because like we're like running everything through Firebase user management, and like we could call cloud functions. They had the same context because it was a library that was easily connected to Firebase into the Node app in the backend. So it made sense. Like we essentially moved off AWS in like less than 3 months. Once we started integrating Firebase as a login. So it worked perfectly from that perspective. And for me, that's an important lesson, right? Like even for somebody like a company of like 2 developers, well, no, 1.5, because it was 1 senior guy and me. I don't count as a full developer. And I think at Civic we have a similar approach where like we go and we talk to these like early stage builders, we help them, we enable them, we give them like a generous free tier. And then in the kind of back end and behind the scenes, we're working on many labs initiatives, you call them, Civic Labs, where we have a few agentic AI specific products that we're going to bring to market. Now, all of them require Auth one way or the other. So I think for us, Auth is like a foundational product where we bring in the token management aspect, the session management aspect to these agentic instances so that we can spin them up at scale as needed. Right, so we don't have like any dependencies from that perspective, and are able to set time to live. We're able to set like session scope and scope requests for the authorization that comes with like a request to the LLM, for example, to read my emails about meetings that I've had with externals instead of like my HR emails or my other emails that are not pertinent to that particular ask. So from that perspective, like we're working on ways to simplify also how to work with agentic AI, because right now there's a few steps that you have to take to be able to do that, and they're not trivial. There are guides obviously to help you build an MCP server, but many of them are like toy level or sandbox level or localhost ready. Whereas what we're talking about here is like, how do we help people graduate to the next level and then deploy to production in a way that's safe and that creates those corridors that I talk about, where a user or a company or an org has only kind of access to their data and can only produce data in a secure environment as opposed to commingled with others.
That makes complete sense. So, we have a lot of Web3 projects and founders that listen to the podcast, as well as many people that have AI projects. So, can you just make like speaking to maybe some of the people that are newer, like why should they look at Civic in order to like, kind of embed, like who should they talk to? Should they be reaching out to you?
Yeah, so both myself and then we have a really cool DevRel, Tyrone. He's all over the social media accounts now and the Slack community that we just launched. Essentially, any contact point on our docs is a good place to start to talk to us. But like the docs themselves, like we worked hard to optimize them, both like for human consumption, but also like if you drop it into your favorite LLM, it'll know what to do with it, and it'll have enough context to be able to like do the job. And I think that's something that we hope will enable more and more people to step into the space more confidently and like not have to kind of spend days reading documentation.
Yeah, kind of launch in like 5-10 minutes is probably like the North Star for you guys. That makes sense. Okay, and then what kind of updates do you guys have on the horizon? Any milestones people should keep an eye out for?
So we're working on bringing passkey as a authentication method. So I've been to a few of the identity focused events, auth focused events in the past 6 months. Google's been pushing this hard. I've seen some really cool case studies of like how this increased like retention. It enabled like people to re-authenticate easily, securely. Like it reduced some of the issues that come with, for example, resetting passwords every now and then. We believe passwords should disappear at Civic. Like that's our core ethos. Like one of the things that we hate the most are passwords. So we don't even enable passwords as an option. You can sign in with email and it'll generate the magic link and all that fun stuff. But there's no password authentication method, and that's by design because we don't want to introduce that level of legacy into the product. And then adding a passkey to your account then enables you just to kind of re-authenticate super easily and maintain security of applications. So you don't have to have an auth token that has a super long time to live. So yeah, you can do more high-risk use cases or high-value use cases where somebody, like, for example, stores a bunch of crypto in there because their agent is doing something productive, like, I don't know, doing a trading bot or something like that, without kind of the risk of, if somebody steals my auth token, then now I'm toast. So from that perspective, like, having a passkey authentication method improves security significantly without adding too much complexity. So that's the big one that's coming up in pretty soon.
Absolutely. Well, finally, where can people, I know you mentioned the docs, they can see the contact there. Where can people connect with you online? See if you guys have like a Twitter account or anywhere you want to funnel some traffic to. Yeah,
we're at Civic Key on Twitter. I am Titus_K on Twitter. And then website is civic.com, docs.civic.com for the Auth main product, and then docs.civic.com/labs if you want to get early access and try out some of these tools. We're always looking for early adopters, for people to try it out, try to break it. We appreciate the feedback, and that's the place to start. And if you build something with Civic Auth, just post about it. Build in public. Tell us. Let us know, and we're here to help. We're here to boost your app if you want to launch it. And we have a co-marketing program as well inside the dashboard. So auth.civic.com, once you sign up, once you're ready, you've built your app, you want to go to production, you can ask for co-marketing, and we'll hook you up with our 100 and something thousand followers on X. So we'll bring you on our podcast. We'll promote the hell out of you.
Very exciting. Well, guys, build with Civic. You got some good co-marketing opportunities as well as some great tech. So until the next episode, let's continue building the future of on-chain AI.